Hey man, let's start with a truth no one talks about. The men who become emotionally cold didn't start that way. They weren't born indifferent. They weren't naturally distant. They didn't enter relationships planning to shut down their hearts. These men started out patient, kind, understanding. They entered love with sincerity, not strategy. They listened, they forgave, they gave second chances. They overlooked small mistakes because they believed in connection. They compromised because they valued harmony over ego. But over time, that patience was stretched, tested, twisted, and taken advantage of. Not always intentionally, but almost always consistently. And slowly, silently, without realizing it, a man who once loved deeply begins to detach, not because he wants to, but because he has learned that his patience doesn't earn him respect, it earns him pain. You see, women don't transform patient men through one big betrayal. It's rarely a single explosion. It's the accumulation of 1,000 small cuts, the dismissive comments, the shifting moods, the constant tests, the emotional swings, the subtle accusations, the unprovoked distance, the sudden coldness. Each moment feels small on its own, but together they create a heavy emotional weight. He absorbs it, he forgives it, he rationalizes it, he tells himself she had a bad day, or maybe he misunderstood, or maybe he needs to be even more supportive. But the truth is, every time he absorbs emotional chaos without receiving emotional nourishment, something inside him hardens, something inside him closes, tightens, shuts down, not on the outside, but in the quiet private spaces within him where his love once lived. At first he thinks the solution is to give more love, to be even more patient, to communicate even more clearly, to try even harder to understand her inner world. He believes that if he shows enough loyalty, enough consistency, enough emotional availability, everything will balance out. But what he doesn't realize is that for some women, the more patience he gives, the less they value it. The calmer he remains, the more they push, the more understanding he becomes, the more they take advantage, not because they're evil, but because they're human, and humans test the limits of anything that doesn't push back. So instead of gratitude, she increases the chaos. Instead of peace, she brings demands. Instead of emotional maturity, she leans into emotional impulsiveness. And the man, confused but committed, continues giving. But here's where the transformation begins. Patience eventually becomes exhaustion. When a man constantly absorbs waves of emotional instability without reciprocity, his nervous system adapts. He grows numb, not out of strength, but out of survival. His empathy dries up, because he has spent it repeatedly trying to understand someone who doesn't try to understand him. His kindness becomes mechanical, because genuine warmth requires emotional energy he no longer has. His desire to communicate fades because communication never leads to change, it only leads to more excuses. Slowly he begins to withdraw. Not visibly at first, but internally. He stops expecting appreciation. He stops hoping for consistency. He stops believing that love will be returned with love. This is when she starts feeling something she can't explain. She feels him slipping, not physically, but energetically. His presence becomes quieter. His reactions become shorter. His enthusiasm becomes dull. The man who once noticed everything now notices nothing. The man who once reassured her now remains silent. The man who once feared losing her now feels indifferent. And this confuses her because she believes the change happened suddenly. But what she doesn't understand is that emotional shutdown is never sudden. It is the final stage of a long, slow process of patience being drained drop by drop, day by day. And here's the most painful part. When he finally becomes emotionally distant, she calls him cold. She calls him distant. She says he has changed. She says he doesn't care. But she never acknowledges that she is the one who shaped this version of him. She doesn't connect his detachment to her instability. She doesn't connect his silence to her disrespect. She doesn't connect his emotional numbness to the endless cycles of chaos he endured. She sees only the outcome, not the process. Only the disappearance of his warmth, not the years he spent protecting it. Only the hardened exterior, not the soft man she slowly eroded. By the time he shuts down, he's not trying to hurt her. He's not trying to win a power game. He's not trying to punish anyone. He's simply tired. Tired of repeating himself, tired of explaining the same things, tired of walking on emotional eggshells, tired of giving reassurance that does nothing, tired of being the emotional foundation for someone who doesn't know how to regulate her own emotions, tired of being the only adult in the relationship. He realizes he cannot fix someone's emotional world if they refuse to look in the mirror. And so he stops trying. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. The kind of quiet that scares women because it carries the weight of finality. What most women don't understand is this: patient men break differently. They don't explode. They don't scream. They don't argue endlessly. They don't threaten to leave every time something goes wrong. They simply stop caring. Their silence becomes the goodbye long before their feet walk out the door. Their lack of reaction becomes the signal that they are emotionally gone. Their absence of effort becomes the proof that their soul is tired. Women mistake this calmness for coldness, but they don't realize it's actually resignation, the realization that staying costs more than leaving. But here's where the transformation becomes irreversible. Once a patient man reaches emotional numbness, he doesn't return to who he used to be. The warmth he once offered so freely becomes guarded. The empathy he once gave without hesitation becomes selective. The love he once handed over with both hands becomes protected behind thick walls. Because now he has learned that not everyone deserves the softness he carries within him. Now he has learned that giving patience to the wrong woman is the fastest way to kill the best parts of himself. Now he has learned that love without boundaries becomes self-destruction. And when he finally leaves, whether physically or emotionally, he walks away with a deeper understanding of himself. He realizes he loved too hard, stayed too long, tolerated too much, forgave too often. He realizes he allowed someone else's chaos to steal his peace. He realizes his patience was used as a cushion for someone else's emotional irresponsibility. But instead of becoming bitter, he becomes wiser. Instead of becoming hateful, he becomes selective. Instead of becoming broken, he becomes disciplined. He learns that the next version of him will not offer unlimited patience. The next version will not tolerate emotional immaturity. The next version will not lose himself inside someone else's storms, because now he knows the cost of being the patient man, and he refuses to pay it ever again. As he steps into this new version of himself, something profound begins happening inside him. He no longer reacts to emotional chaos the same way he once did. In the past, he tried to calm storms, he tried to heal wounds he did not create, he tried to carry burdens that weren't his. He believed that if he just stayed long enough, patient enough, loving enough, she would eventually meet him halfway. But now, after everything he endured, he finally understands that emotional chaos is not his battlefield. He realizes that his job is not to fix someone who refuses accountability, not to soothe someone who weaponizes their moods, not to give endless reassurance to someone who thrives on instability. His silence now becomes his shield, his boundaries become his armor, and his refusal to engage becomes his power. And the woman who once relied on his patience finds herself face to face with a man she can no longer emotionally bend. This is the phase where she starts panicking, though she will never admit it. She feels the shift in him, the shift from soft to firm, from expressive to quiet, from patient to indifferent. She senses the emotional distance, the lack of eagerness, the steady calm that once comforted her but now scares her, because she realizes something she never expected. She pushed him too far. She tested him one too many times. She took advantage of his forgiveness once too often. And now, the emotional safety he once gave without hesitation is gone. She tries to provoke him the way she used to. She tries to spark the old reactions. She tries to pull him back into the emotional patterns that once gave her control. But nothing works. His silence no longer belongs to her, it belongs to himself. This is the moment she starts remembering all the times he stood by her, all the nights he was patient when she was upset, all the moments he listened when she vented, all the arguments he quietly diffused, all the tears he comforted, all the storms he walked through with her. But now, when she looks at him, she doesn't see the same softness. She sees someone who has outgrown her emotional volatility. She sees someone she can no longer manipulate through guilt or tears. She sees someone who is no longer affected by her silence, because he has mastered his own. And this realization hits her harder than any breakup ever could, because she knows he didn't become this man on his own. She shaped him into this version through her own inconsistency. Meanwhile, inside him, a deeper transformation is taking place. He discovers the strength that was hiding beneath all that patience. He realizes that the emotional numbness he carries is not weakness. It is the birth of boundaries. It is the awakening of standards. It is the cultivation of emotional discipline. He begins seeing that love without limits becomes self-destruction, that loyalty without reflection becomes self-deception, that patience without reciprocity becomes self-neglect. He recognizes patterns he never noticed before, how he was always the one calming, always the one compromising, always the one repairing, always the one giving second chances, and now that he's detached, he looks back with a mix of sadness and clarity. That wasn't love, that was emotional survival. As he grows emotionally distant, the space between them becomes heavy, not with anger, but with truth. The truth that he asked for very little, yet received even less. The truth that he offered stability in exchange for instability. The truth that his patience made him predictable, and his predictability made him easy to take for granted. The truth that she never truly feared losing him because he made it too easy for her to stay. And now, standing in his new energy, the energy of a man who has finally had enough, she feels something she has never felt before. The consequences of her own behavior, not through arguments, not through revenge, not through bitterness, but through silence. His silence. He begins to understand the psychology behind his transformation. He didn't become emotionless because he stopped caring. He became emotionless because he cared for too long. He cared past the point of exhaustion. He cared past the point of logic. He cared past the point of self-respect. He cared until caring became painful. And when caring becomes painful, the heart does not harden out of choice. It hardens out of necessity. He didn't shut down because he wanted to hurt her. He shut down because he finally realized he cannot pour into a cracked vessel. He cannot fix emotional wounds he didn't cause. He cannot stretch his patience to cover someone else's chaos. And so the softest part of him finally withdrew, not out of malice, but out of protection. This transformation changes how he views relationships forever. He is no longer impressed by beauty, no longer swayed by affection, no longer manipulated by tears, no longer softened by apologies that lack change. He begins evaluating people based on consistency, emotional maturity, accountability, stability. The things he ignored before, because he loved blindly, now stand at the forefront of his judgment. And women sense this shift immediately. They feel his standards, they feel his boundaries, they feel his new energy. He becomes the man who does not tolerate emotional games, the man who is not afraid of walking away, the man who is no longer dependent on affection to feel whole. He becomes someone rare, a man with emotional discipline, not emotional dependency. As he carries this new identity, something surprising happens. He starts attracting healthier women, women who communicate clearly, women who take accountability, women who don't escalate drama, women who don't punish him with silence, women who don't rely on chaos to feel connected, because emotionally mature women are drawn to emotionally disciplined men, and emotionally chaotic women are repelled by them. His transformation becomes a filter. The unstable fade away. The mature gravitate toward him. This is when he realizes something life-changing. Losing his patience was not the end of him. It was the beginning of a stronger version of him. A version who can love deeply without losing himself. A version who can give affection without sacrificing self-respect. A version who knows his worth without needing validation. But before he fully embraces this new chapter, he goes through a very real stage, the stage where he mourns the man he used to be. He mourns the version of himself that loved without fear. He mourns the version that trusted freely. He mourns the version that believed patience was always noble. He mourns the version that kept giving chances. He mourns the version that believed love alone could fix everything. And this mourning is not weakness, it is growth. Because he must let go of the naive version of himself in order to protect the wiser version he is becoming. He learns that maturity is not losing sensitivity, it is redirecting it toward people who won't treat it as a weakness. And when he finally stands in his full transformation, when his emotional numbness has settled into emotional clarity, he becomes someone completely different from who he was at the start. He becomes a man who can walk away without hesitation, a man who does not beg for affection, a man who does not break when love leaves, a man who does not tolerate chaos disguised as passion, a man who no longer gets drained by someone else's instability. He becomes the man who protects his peace first and lets connection come second. And ironically, this is the version of him women fear losing the most. Not because he is cold, but because he is finally whole. Because now he knows the truth. Patience without boundaries doesn't make you strong, it makes you disappear. And once a man disappears emotionally, he never comes back the same. As he continues evolving, another realization begins to surface. The version of him that once tolerated emotional turbulence was living in a fantasy, not reality. He believed that love meant absorbing everything. He believed that patience meant endurance. He believed that understanding meant self-sacrifice. But now he sees the truth clearly. What he called patience was actually avoidance of conflict. What he called love was actually self-neglect. What he called loyalty was actually a fear of being alone. And as he examines these old patterns, he feels a quiet anger, not at her, but at himself. Anger for all the ways he abandoned his own emotions to protect hers. Anger for how he silenced his needs to accommodate her instability. Anger for how he allowed someone else's moods to dictate his well-being. But that anger becomes fuel. Fuel to rise, fuel to establish boundaries, fuel to never again lose himself in the name of love. This shift transforms him from the inside out. He begins recognizing how slowly he had been drained, how each argument chipped away at him, how each accusation weighed on him, how each emotional test fractured his trust. He recalls the moments she dismissed his feelings, the moments she invalidated his experience, the moments she responded to his calm with chaos. He remembers how every attempt to communicate ended with blame turned back onto him. It wasn't that he lacked patience, it was that she lacked accountability. And as he reflects on this, he realizes that emotional numbness wasn't the destruction of who he was, it was the protection of who he could become. He no longer views his transformation as loss, he views it as self-preservation. With this clarity, he begins to rebuild himself piece by piece. But this time, he builds with intention. He becomes mindful of who gets access to him. He evaluates energy, not words. He observes patterns, not promises. He values consistency, not chemistry. He understands that emotional stability is not optional, it is foundational. He realizes the version of him who loved unconditionally, without boundaries, was walking through the world with open wounds, hoping the right woman wouldn't touch the wrong places. But now he has armor, not made of coldness, but of wisdom. Not made of distance, but of discernment. Not made of bitterness, but of experience. And this new armor changes the way he walks through life, slower, steadier, more intentional, more self-protective. He also begins recognizing how powerful emotional detachment can be when used correctly. In the past, detachment meant shutting down completely. Now it means choosing wisely. It means not handing emotional access to anyone who hasn't proven emotional maturity. It means not explaining himself to someone committed to misunderstanding him. It means not investing in someone who treats consistency like a favor instead of a duty. Emotional detachment becomes his filter, a filter that weeds out chaos long before it reaches his heart, and suddenly his life feels lighter, his mind feels clearer, his days feel calmer, because he is no longer carrying the emotional weight of someone who refused to carry their own. In this new emotional landscape, he learns one of the hardest truths. The woman who pushes a patient man into numbness often cries over the cold version she created. When she finally notices his silence, she tries to reconnect with the man he used to be. She apologizes, but it feels rehearsed. She reassures, but it feels shallow. She asks what's wrong, but he no longer has the energy to explain. She makes promises of change, but he knows her patterns too well. What she doesn't understand is this. She didn't lose the patient man in one moment. She lost him slowly. Throughout the years, she ignored his needs, and now that she wants him back, she's met with a version of him she cannot reach, cannot soften, cannot pull back into the emotional world she once controlled. This is the moment she realizes something painful. Men do not break loudly, they break quietly. Men do not leave all at once. They leave mentally first, emotionally second, physically last. By the time a patient man becomes emotionally numb, he has already replayed every argument, every disappointment, every emotional dismissal. He has already processed the breakup, while she thought everything was fine. His silence is not confusion, it is conclusion. His lack of reaction is not indifference, it is exhaustion. His distance is not punishment, it is self-respect. She finally realizes that the heart she took for granted is no longer hers to influence, and that realization stays with her longer than any breakup ever could. Meanwhile, he steps further into emotional discipline, the kind of discipline that changes a man's entire identity. He stops responding to things that once triggered him. He stops explaining himself to people who don't listen. He stops taking responsibility for emotions that aren't his. He stops engaging in arguments that lead nowhere. He stops chasing clarity from someone who thrives on confusion. He stops trying to be understood by someone who never tried to understand him. Instead, he redirects that energy into building himself, into becoming mentally stronger, emotionally sharper, socially selective, spiritually grounded. This discipline becomes the defining trait that separates the man he once was from the man he is becoming. As he becomes more emotionally disciplined, women start treating him differently. They approach him with more respect, more caution, more sincerity, because they sense that he is no longer the man who will tolerate emotional chaos. They feel that he has boundaries now, real boundaries, not verbal ones. They see that he is not seeking anyone's validation. They see that he is not controlled by loneliness. They see that he is not desperate for connection. His emotional numbness did not make him unloving, it made him structured, and structure is rare. Women begin gravitating toward him, not because he is cold, but because he is stable, not because he is distant, but because he is consistent, not because he is emotionless, but because he no longer wastes emotions on anyone undeserving. But perhaps the biggest transformation happens internally. He no longer fears being alone. In the past, loneliness terrified him. It made him stay in situations he should have left. It made him forgive things he shouldn't have accepted. It made him tolerate behavior that drained him. But now, after losing himself once, he would rather be alone than with someone who cost him his peace. Solitude becomes his sanctuary. Silence becomes his reset. Peace becomes non-negotiable. A man who no longer fears being alone becomes impossible to manipulate, because you cannot emotionally control someone who is not afraid of distance. You cannot guilt-trip someone who doesn't rely on you for validation, and you cannot break someone who has already rebuilt himself from emotional ruin. This is where the transformation reaches its peak. He becomes a man who loves from strength, not weakness. A man who gives affection, but only when it's reciprocated. A man who communicates, but only with someone who listens without defending their ego. A man who shows emotion, but never at the cost of his dignity. A man who invests, but never more than the other person invests in return. He has learned the lesson life tried to teach him through heartbreak. A man with boundaries is unbreakable. A man without them is disposable. And now that he finally understands this, the days of him being drained, used, tested, and taken for granted are over. He walks into the world as a new force, not emotionless, but emotionally invincible. As he evolves further, he begins to understand something he could never articulate before. Emotional withdrawal is not a weakness. It's a sign that his spirit finally refused to carry what wasn't his. He recognizes that the emotional burdens he once shouldered were never sustainable, yet he forced himself to remain strong because society taught him that a real man never breaks. But now he sees the truth. Real strength isn't absorbing endless damage, it's knowing when to walk away from the source. His emotional detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. Clarity that tells him, I won't sacrifice my mental peace for someone who thrives on emotional chaos. And once he internalizes this, his entire energy shifts. He no longer apologizes for protecting himself. He no longer feels guilty for distancing himself. He no longer feels obligated to keep showing patience to someone who has never earned it. He also begins reflecting on the emotional patterns she created, the mood swings, the accusations, the silent treatments, the unpredictable reactions. He remembers how every time she felt insecure, she projected it onto him, how every time she felt overwhelmed, she made it his fault, how every time she lost control emotionally, she tried to drag him into her storm. And he realizes that these patterns weren't random, they were repeated until they became normal. But the problem with surviving chaos is that eventually chaos becomes the standard. Over time, he stopped expecting peace. He stopped seeking emotional support. He stopped hoping for change. He simply endured, and endurance, when stretched beyond its limits, turns into numbness. Now, with distance and clarity, he sees how unhealthy it all was, and he vows never again to normalize dysfunction. Something else becomes clear to him. Emotional disrespect is more damaging than physical distance. She may not have shouted all the time. She may not have cheated. She may not have physically hurt him. But emotional disrespect cuts in ways words never can. The moments she dismissed his feelings, the times she called him overreactive when he was calm, the times she belittled him during her emotional spirals, the times she demanded understanding but offered none. These things don't leave bruises, but they leave impressions. Impressions that eventually become invisible walls between them. These walls are what turn patient men into distant men, because once emotional disrespect repeats often enough, the heart stops trying to connect, and once the heart stops trying, the relationship is already over, even if the breakup hasn't happened yet. He starts to see how deeply emotional manipulation influenced his transformation. Not always intentional manipulation, but manipulation nonetheless. The guilt trips, the "if you loved me you would" lines, the emotional punishments when he didn't react the way she wanted, the sudden coldness when she didn't get her way, the selective affection, the strategic distance, the dramatic overreactions to minor inconveniences. These tactics don't feel like manipulation while you're in them, because they're disguised as emotions. But now, with clarity, he sees they were patterns of control. And once a man recognizes emotional manipulation for what it is, he snaps out of the spell immediately. He becomes immune to it. He becomes indifferent to it. He becomes emotionally unavailable to the tactics that once had power over him. Gradually, he notices how peaceful life becomes when chaos leaves. He wakes up with a calm mind. He goes through his day without pressure. He feels lighter, clearer, more focused. He realizes that his emotional energy was being drained for years. Not by life, not by work, but by someone who didn't know how to regulate her own emotions. Now that he's removed himself from that environment, he can think for himself again. He can breathe, he can relax, he can return to hobbies he once abandoned, he can pursue goals that were overshadowed by arguments. He feels his identity returning, the one that existed before he lost himself, trying to keep someone else emotionally stable. This return to self is what transforms him the most. He isn't just healing, he's rebuilding. Then comes the stage of internal rewriting. He begins questioning everything he once believed about love. He wonders why he stayed so long, why he tolerated so much, why he ignored red flags, why he excused behavior he should have walked away from. And then he realizes he stayed because he thought love meant sacrifice. He thought commitment meant unconditional endurance. He thought being a good man meant absorbing the damage without complaining. But now, with emotional clarity, he understands that love is not supposed to ruin you. It's not supposed to drain you. It's not supposed to make you numb. Healthy love doesn't need you to destroy yourself to maintain it. Healthy love doesn't turn patient men into emotionless shells. Healthy love recognizes effort and reciprocates it. And this understanding redefines how he will approach relationships forever. This new perspective also changes what he expects from women. He no longer wants someone who is exciting, but emotionally unpredictable. He no longer wants someone who is passionate, but lacks emotional accountability. He no longer wants someone who is affectionate one day and distant the next. He doesn't mistake drama for intimacy anymore. He doesn't confuse intensity with love. He doesn't equate chaos with connection. Now he wants stability, emotional maturity, calm communication, consistency, effort, peace, respect. A partner, not a project. Someone who adds to his life, not someone he has to emotionally babysit. And this new standard eliminates half the women he once chased, but it opens the door to someone truly compatible. He also notices an unexpected shift. Women begin treating him with a level of respect he has never received before. They sense his emotional discipline. They sense his lack of neediness. They sense his boundaries. They sense that he is not a man who entertains emotional nonsense. And something interesting happens. Women become softer around him. They become more feminine, more receptive, more patient, more composed. Why? Because women adapt to the energy of the man they're dealing with. Chaos thrives next to weak men who tolerate everything. But next to a man with standards, a man with boundaries, a man who doesn't get emotionally rattled, chaos dies. She adjusts, she behaves, she respects the emotional environment he sets because she feels she cannot control it. As he grows into this emotionally disciplined version of himself, something else happens. Women from his past try to return. The same women who dismissed his feelings, the same women who tested his patience, the same women who took him for granted. They come back not because they've changed, but because he has. They sense the value he now carries. They sense his emotional independence. They sense his elevated standards. They sense the masculine energy they once underestimated. But when they return, he feels nothing. No anger, no longing, no desire for revenge, just neutrality. Because once a patient man becomes emotionless, he doesn't hate the woman who drained him. He simply outgrows her. And outgrowing someone is far more permanent than leaving them. And then finally, he reaches a place he never thought possible, a place of emotional authority, not dominance, not coldness, but authority. He no longer reacts out of fear. He no longer chooses out of loneliness. He no longer tolerates out of habit. He no longer loves out of desperation. His emotions are his, not tools for someone else to use or test. He becomes the type of man who can walk away without second guessing, the type of man who can set boundaries without guilt, the type of man who can choose peace over attachment, The type of man who will never again allow someone to drain him into numbness, because now he understands the most important lesson of all. You don't lose yourself by loving someone. You lose yourself by loving someone who refuses to love you back with the same emotional maturity. Now that he's reached emotional authority, he begins to understand the deepest layer of his transformation, the part that isn't visible to anyone else. He realizes that the numbness he once feared has become the foundation for a new kind of strength. Not the loud, aggressive strength the world advertises, but a quiet, rooted, unshakable inner power, the kind of strength that comes from surviving emotional storms without losing your sanity. The kind of strength that grows when you recognize your breaking point and choose yourself instead of clinging to chaos. The kind of strength that makes you immune to manipulation, immune to emotional blackmail, immune to guilt-driven control. He used to confuse numbness with weakness, but now he sees that numbness was simply the bridge between who he was and who he refuses to be ever again. He begins to see how that old version of himself would apologize for everything, even things that weren't his fault. He remembers how he used to feel guilty for setting boundaries, for saying no, for asking for respect. He remembers how he walked on eggshells to avoid triggering her emotional explosions, and he remembers how every time he tried to bring up his concerns, she flipped the script, making him feel unreasonable, sensitive, or ungrateful. But the new him doesn't entertain those dynamics anymore. He no longer tolerates emotional gymnastics. He doesn't feel responsible for other people's reactions. He doesn't fear conflict when the truth needs to be told. Emotional manipulation no longer slides into his mind the way it used to. His self-respect has become non-negotiable, and once a man learns self-respect, he becomes unstoppable. He also becomes painfully aware of how many years he spent hoping she would change, hoping she would finally understand him, hoping she would meet him halfway, hoping his patience would eventually inspire her maturity. But now, standing in this elevated version of himself, he realizes how unrealistic that hope was. People don't change because you love them harder, they change because they decide to face themselves. She never faced herself. She never confronted her patterns. She never took accountability for the emotional chaos she created. And no matter how much patience he gave, nothing ever shifted. That realization hurts at first, but it also frees him, because he finally understands the weight that wasn't his to carry. With this awareness, he begins seeing his past through a different lens, not with regret, but with gratitude. He understands that if she hadn't pushed him to his emotional limits, he would have never evolved. If she hadn't taken advantage of his patience, he would have never learned boundaries. If she hadn't drained him, he would have never learned self-preservation. If she hadn't dismissed his needs, he would have never learned to prioritize them. If she hadn't broken him, he would have never built himself into a man who cannot be broken the same way again. It's ironic, the woman who transformed him into an emotionless man accidentally transformed him into the strongest version of himself. She didn't teach him love, she taught him self-respect. As he steps deeper into this new identity, he no longer feels the need to impress anyone. He doesn't chase validation. He doesn't seek approval. He doesn't perform for affection. He no longer tries to prove his worth through constant effort. Instead, he lets his energy speak. He lets his silence speak. He lets his standards speak. Anyone who aligns with his peace is welcome. Anyone who disrupts it is removed. No chaos, no hesitation, no guilt. Because he has lived through the consequences of ignoring red flags. He has lived through the exhaustion of always being the emotional anchor. He has lived through the pain of giving more than he received. Now his life moves differently, calmly, intentionally, powerfully, and this is when women begin reacting to him in ways they never did before. They sense the emotional walls he built, but instead of being turned off, they are intrigued. They sense his strength, but instead of feeling intimidated, they feel drawn to it. They sense his boundaries, but instead of resisting them, they respect them. Because women can feel when a man has done the inner work. They can feel when he no longer bleeds emotionally. They can feel when he isn't swayed by beauty, by attention, by compliments, by emotional highs. They can feel when his heart is no longer easily accessed. And that energy, the energy of a man who is grounded in his own identity, triggers something primal in them. Desire, respect, curiosity, effort. But perhaps the greatest shift happens internally. He no longer wants the kind of love he once begged for. The old him wanted intensity. The old him wanted chemistry that felt like fire. The old him wanted passion that drowned logic. He wanted connection that consumed him. But the new him wants something entirely different. Now he wants consistency. peace, reciprocity. He wants someone who communicates instead of reacts, someone who listens instead of attacks, someone who grows instead of repeats, someone who apologizes instead of deflects, someone who values stability over emotional games, someone who contributes to his peace, not extracts it. He no longer confuses chaos with love. He recognizes that chaos is simply trauma dressed up as passion. He also begins to understand something every emotionally evolved man learns. Patience is not a virtue when it enables dysfunction. Patience is not strength when it allows disrespect. Patience is not love when it destroys your self-esteem. Patience is not noble when it becomes a prison. He realizes that patience must be selective. Patience must be earned. Patience must be mutual. Patience must be paired with effort. And once he internalizes this truth, he stops offering patience by default. Instead, he observes, he evaluates, he tests, he allows time to reveal true intentions. And if a woman brings chaos, instability, blame shifting, emotional manipulation, he walks. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Eventually, he reaches a calmness that is impossible to shake, a calmness born from surviving emotional storms he never should have endured. This calmness is not passive, it is powerful. It is the calmness of a man who knows himself, the calmness of a man who trusts himself, the calmness of a man who doesn't fear losing someone because he has already lost himself once and rebuilt himself stronger. This calmness makes him immune to drama, immune to provocation, immune to emotional baiting. A woman can try to trigger him, but he won't react. She can try to test him, but he won't fold. She can try to manipulate him, but he won't engage. His peace is too valuable. His heart is too protected. His energy is too sacred. And finally, here is the deepest truth, the truth that completes the transformation. Women don't turn patient men into emotionless men by breaking their hearts. They do it by slowly draining a man until he no longer recognizes himself. And when he finally reaches that breaking point, when his patience has been stretched beyond forgiveness, beyond hope, beyond endurance, he doesn't explode, he evolves. He becomes a man who loves differently, chooses differently, thinks differently, feels differently, a man who will never again sacrifice his peace for someone else's emotional comfort, a man who will never again carry chaos that isn't his, a man who will never again allow his heart to be shaped by someone who never learned to manage their own. He may look emotionless on the outside, but on the inside, he has finally learned the most important lesson of all. The man you become after emotional exhaustion is the man you should have been from the beginning, grounded, selective, disciplined, and unshakable.